So let's talk about how the domain name system works within Microsoft Azure. Now, the domain name system is sometimes abbreviated as DNS. And it's almost like the phone directory for the internet. It is how a domain name like Microsoft.com gets turned into an IP address. And it's the IP address that computers and servers use to communicate with each other. Now, this is an IPv4 address that also supports IPv6, which is a different address format. So your computer uses a domain name system probably provided by your employer or by your internet service provider to look up any domain that you're interested in visiting. That gets converted into an IP address, and it actually gets cached or stored on your local computer for a short period of time, and you don't go and look it up every single time. Now, within Microsoft Azure for virtual machines, there are 3 options for domain name services. Now, Azure does provide a DNS service by default. You can also provide your own DNS, as if you're running your own DNS server, maybe inside your corporation or inside of Azure. And finally, there's a service called the Azure Private DNS service that allows you to run your own DNS services. Now, the Azure Provided DNS is, like I said, the default. So when you create a new virtual machine, it does have access to the internet, it has access to other computers on the same virtual network, and it can address them using their domain names, and that's provided by Azure's DNS. Now, you don't have to do anything to configure it. The other benefit of using the Azure Provided DNS is that you can use what are called host names to connect to machines. So if you have a virtual machine on the same network as another, then you can just refer to it by its host name and it will be able to address it. And so you don't have to have .microsoft.com or .example.com to fully qualify the domain in the traditional sense. Now, there is also this private DNS service. This is a feature of the exam. Now, private DNS service only exists for your own benefit. It's not like you're buying a domain name on GoDaddy and having it registered in the public internet domain registry. You can create your own custom domain names and have them recognized by your virtual machines. And you can call them by familiar names like dev.local, staging.local, production.local. It's only valid on your network, and that means that you would not be able to access those domains from the public internet. Now, it doesn't have to be registered. It's not like a, valid top-level domain or even a valid domain. The way that the Azure Private DNS works, it requires, they call them labels. And so there's a 2-label minimum, and labels are separated by a period. And so it's like dev.local is a valid 2-label domain name within the private DNS, and you can have up to 34 of them. And that would be a bit excessive, but that might be something that you're interested in doing. Now, I should say there are some caveats. This is pretty much exclusive to virtual machines. If you wanted to have Azure App Services addressing virtual machines by some private DNS, you wouldn't be able to do it. You can't modify the name services, the DNS services for the Azure App Services, like the platforms as a services, like databases and stuff. So this is only for VNets where you do have access to modify their IP settings and what they use for DNS services. Should also say the big benefit to this is being able to address servers by a friendly name instead of having to rely on memorizing an IP address, so that you have dev.local, you know that's your dev environment. And even if the IP changes, you can map the dev.local to the new IP, and it's just you never have to remember it. And if the IP changes, you don't have to go in 50 different places and update all of that. So this is why you would use Azure Private DNS service, and that it's available.